My name is Louise. I'm turning 34 this year. After graduating from college, I got a job at what one would call a major corporation. Our company, known to just about anyone, offered a decent salary, even for new hires. However, a high salary came with a price. I had to travel for business or training about half of the month, and working overtime and on holidays was usual. It was a pretty tough job, but I felt fulfilled. By the time I turned 28, I was promoted to be the department head, a quick progression, pretty rare for a woman. 4 years ago, I married my boyfriend of 2 years, Brian. We met through a mutual friend. I wasn't particularly interested in dating, but my friend, concerned for me, introduced him to me. I had no particular desire to marry, thinking that I could live my entire life single. Brian, however, said from the start, I want to get married soon. I want kids too. Raising them when we're older is going to be harder, right? I didn't want children, and I found the thought of getting married to be absurd when we hardly knew each other. Plus, I had just been promoted and couldn't think about getting married and pregnant. Even when Brian brought up the topic of marriage, I would gently reject it, saying, You're rushing. We need to get to know each other better. Besides, with marriage, it's not going to be just about us. To this, Brian suggested, Okay. Then let's get married after dating for 2 years? By then, we'd know each other well, right? At the time, I thought we wouldn't last 2 years, but in the end, we dated for 2 years, and then got married. During our relationship, he was faithful, wasn't a gambler, and was sincere and kind to me. I saw him as a hardworking and diligent person when it came to his work. However, his great ego was something that had always bothered me a bit. When a senior at work would point out something to him, he would rant at home, saying, I did it because I thought it was the best, but they act so bossy. I don't have to be told what to do. Listening to him in detail, it was clear he was being called out for his mistakes, but it seemed like he couldn't stand being criticized, whether it was by a superior or not. When we decided to have dinner with both families for greetings, for some reason, he picked a restaurant that charged over $200 per person and asked me to pay half since it was so expensive. I suggested a less expensive place, but Brian insisted. This is important. If I choose a cheap restaurant, they'll think I'm stingy, and wouldn't listen. If that's the case, he should handle it all himself. But he said, I can't cover 8 people with my salary. At most, maybe 3. So please cover the remaining 5, and ended up asking me to pay more than half. We had 4 people from each family, making a total of 8. So Brian was saying we should meet at an over $200 per person restaurant, even though he couldn't even cover his family's share. I wasn't quite happy when he brought up this plan, and I was even more puzzled when he told everyone at the dinner, Don't worry about the bill today, I'll take care of it. But everyone seemed happy, and I thought I should let him take the lead in this situation. So I swallowed my words. Looking back, I think I might have made a mistake. I regret not calling off my marriage to Brian, a man so full of himself. Brian's attitude towards me changed completely after we got married. He began to talk to me in a condescending manner all the time. Before we got married, he knew I was busy with work and said he would help with household chores. However, after we got married, he started saying things like, What would the neighbors think if they saw a man hanging out laundry? Besides, household chores are a woman's job, right? I'm out working hard, so let me relax at home. He never lifted a finger to help, no matter how busy I was. Does he really think people would be fazed by seeing a man putting out laundry? I was fed up with his domineering attitude, but I didn't mind doing the housework, so I could tolerate it. What ticked me off was the fact that Brian was giving money to his parents. Although Brian's parents were farmers, they seemed to be struggling to make ends meet. Seemed like they never made much in the past either. And now that they were nearing their 70s, farming was becoming more difficult. Because of this, they would frequently call Brian to send them some money. At first, I thought it couldn't be helped since they were struggling, but within 6 months of getting married, Brian started giving all his salary to his parents. Brian wouldn't contribute any money for our living expenses. I once told him, "This is so much! It's ridiculous to cover all the living expenses with my salary alone." But Brian replied, "How can you say such a thing when my family is in trouble? They're your family too. Besides, you make more money than I do, so you should be able to live just fine," and wouldn't listen to me. On the phone with his parents, Brian always said, "It's fine, I'm taking care of it with my salary. I won't let her say anything about it." It was as if he was only sending part of his salary. But in fact, he was giving all of his salary to his parents. He had no money left for himself and started asking me for pocket money, saying, "Can you give me about $200? I won't even be able to afford lunch at this rate." I finally decided I couldn't continue living this way and suggested, "Let's decide on a monthly limit for the amount we send to your parents. Please find a way to cover your lunch expenses on your own." But Brian would always say, "Got it, we'll do that." But he kept sending all his monthly salary to his parents. That was the one thing I couldn't stand, no matter what. One day, I had to be away from home for about 2 weeks for a business trip. From Brian, I got a, "What? 2 weeks? What am I gonna eat then? And what about my laundry?" Even though he knew I had a job that required frequent travel. When I, annoyed at his childishness, said, "Figure it out yourself. You're a grown man. If you can't, why don't you go home while I'm away? You'll eat good there, right?" Brian reluctantly agreed. 2 weeks later, when I returned home, for some reason, Brian's sister Elizabeth was at home. She lived a little away from us, and we hadn't seen each other since our wedding. As I was wondering if something had happened, Elizabeth, seeing my face, said, "Hi, Louise. It's been a while." "Oh, that's right. The money. It was a lifesaver. Thank you so much." With a beaming smile, saying things that made no sense to me. Without even having the time to put away my luggage, I asked Elizabeth, "Money? What are you talking about?" Then Elizabeth, without any hesitation, said, "Huh? Brian said that since you have some savings, he'd provide for my startup capital. He told me not to worry because that's at least $1 million. I didn't understand at all. At that moment, Brian entered the room holding my passbook and seal. As soon as Brian saw my face, he said, "Oh, welcome back. Good timing. I'm going to give your savings to Elizabeth. You know Elizabeth. She's a nail artist, right? She's always wanted her own shop. It seems like she's been saving her own money, but she's about $1 million short. I remember that the savings you've had since you were single is exactly $1 million, so I told her to come get it." He then handed the passbook and seal to Elizabeth, saying with a smile, "You're lucky. This will make your dream come true. Be grateful, okay?" I couldn't hold back any more and snapped, "What are you talking about? That's my money. Why are you deciding that on your own? I mean, I could understand if you said you'd lend it. We'd need a promissory note and a promise to pay back a certain amount each month, right? Without doing any of that, what do you mean you're going to give away someone else's savings?" I then took the passbook and seal back from Elizabeth. Brian looked at me and said, "What? We're family, aren't we? It's ridiculous to write a promissory note for family members. Besides, we're not lending this. We're giving it. You don't even have a hobby because you're always working, right? It's a waste to just hold on to money. Elizabeth has a dream. Isn't it more meaningful to use it to make that dream come true?" And then he glared at me. Upon hearing Brian's words, I understood he was someone I couldn't communicate with. Just when I thought it was a waste of time to continue the conversation, Brian said, "This money is too good for you, so I'm giving it to Elizabeth. You'd only waste it. You can just work and save up again. Understand? If you still want to argue, we'll get divorced." Seeing this as an opportunity, an idea sparked my mind. I quickly responded, "All right, let's get a divorce. I'll write up the divorce papers and send them to you. I'll come pick up my things soon. Until the divorce is finalized, I'll stay at a hotel. Bye for now." And with that, I grabbed my luggage from a business trip and left the house swiftly. Brian was stunned by my sudden decision, but after a while, he sent multiple texts, saying things like, "You can still come back if you apologize now," and "Elizabeth says she'll forgive you for what happened today, as long as you give her the money. So stop being stubborn and come back." I ignored all his texts. Who does he think he is? The next day, I went to the city hall and mailed the signed divorce papers back home. Even then, he kept texting me, saying things like, "Are you really sure about this? I'm going to submit the divorce papers, okay?" I only responded with, "Please submit them as soon as possible," and ignored all the other texts. The divorce with Brian was finalized sooner than I thought. A week after the divorce was finalized, I timed it with when Brian was at work and moved my things to my new house. When Brian texted me about submitting the divorce papers, he had said, "I feel great being able to divorce an ugly woman like you. We are strangers now. Make sure you divide our property properly since we're divorced." So, I didn't take most of the furniture and appliances. At the same time, I deposited half of the small savings I had accumulated during our marriage into his bank account and left it there. That night, I got multiple calls from Brian. At first, I ignored them, thinking, here we go. But after a while, I started getting calls from Elizabeth, too. Finally, I picked up the damn phone, and Brian immediately yelled, "Hey! What happened to our property division? This is ridiculous! There's only $800 in this account." Well, I was thinking to myself, it's exactly as I expected. I told Brian, "See, I did split the property. We originally had $1,600 in our joint account, right? I left you with half of it, so $800. And all the furniture and appliances were purchased after our marriage, so I left them all behind. That's a fair property division too, isn't it?" Just to make it clear, I got less than you. But Brian was not convinced. He said, "What are you talking about? You're supposed to have $1 million in your savings, right? So half of that, $500,000, should be mine, right? Plus, you have an inheritance from your grandpa died, right? That inheritance should be half mine too." I was flabbergasted and couldn't help but laugh. I saw this coming. Otherwise, I don't think Brian would have agreed to file for divorce so easily. I managed to hold back my laughter and explained, "Listen, Brian, division of property refers to the division of marital assets. My savings from when I was single and the inheritance I received do not fall under marital assets. I don't know who you heard about property division from, but I consulted a lawyer and split our marital assets properly. The money we saved after getting married was actually all earned by me. You never contributed to our household expenses, remember? Be grateful that I even divided that." Brian said, "You're lying! There's no way that's true! You can't fool me! Hand it over properly, or I'll sue you!" He desperately yelled with a shaky voice, but I calmly told him, "Go ahead. If you can sue me, then do it. I haven't deceived you in any way. Plus, I've done the property division fairly. I'm not afraid of being sued." Upon hearing this, Brian flusteredly said, "Wait! Let's forget about the divorce. I was wrong. Come back to me." He completely backpedaled and asked for reconciliation. I replied, "What are you talking about? The divorce has already been finalized, and I have absolutely no intention of going back. This is not a joke." And then I added, "Since this is the end, let me tell you, if you plan on continuing to live there, you have to pay the rent yourself. The rent is about $1,800 a month. You probably didn't know because you've never paid for it." When I said this, Brian replied in a weak voice, "There's no way I can afford that." If he can't pay, then he just has to leave. That's none of my business anymore. After that, it seems that Brian went back to his parents' house because he couldn't afford the rent. Unable to come up with the moving expenses, Brian sold the furniture and appliances I left behind for moving expenses. His parents thought Brian was making a decent amount of money and happily welcomed him, thinking it would make their lives easier. But in reality, Brian wasn't able to give them as much money as when he was with me, and he seems to be quite uncomfortable staying there. Elizabeth had been told by Brian not to worry about money and had started preparing to start her own business. But since she couldn't get a penny of my savings, it seems that the startup plan came to a halt. Moreover, it seems that she suffered a loss because she had to cancel the preparations she had started. Brian seems to have been given a hard time by Elizabeth as well, but that's not my problem. I'm currently focusing on my work while living alone. I've had enough of marriage. I still get messages from Brian saying he wants to get back together, but I completely ignore them. It was kind of funny to hear him report his situation to me every now and then, so I let it be. But I'm planning to block him soon.
Would you mind paying if you want to hold Lucas? After all, you two are practically strangers to him. What? My husband and I were utterly stunned. Never in our wildest dreams did we imagine we'd have to pay our daughter-in-law to hold our own grandson. My name is Michelle, a 56-year-old homemaker. I live with my husband, who's also 56. We have one son, Tom, who's currently 28. He got married 2 years ago. His wife, Sarah, is 10 years his senior at 38. After graduating college, Tom got a job and moved out on his own. Apparently, Sarah, a senior colleague at his workplace, aggressively pursued him from the get-go. Tom has always been strong in STEM subjects. Throughout high school and college, he was immersed in them. Shy and reserved by nature, he had never dated a woman before. Suddenly, pursued by an older woman at work, Tom was initially reluctant. However, Sarah kept pushing, inviting him to lunch, finding reasons to be near him, and eventually they started going out for drinks. Things escalated quickly from here. When we heard that Tom was marrying a woman 10 years his senior, my husband and I were shocked. But it was Tom's choice, and considering his reserved nature, we thought maybe it was a good thing to be led by an older woman. As wedding preparations progressed, we encountered some surprises. Sarah insisted on changing outfits 5 times during the ceremony. Of course, it was all Sarah's idea. Tom, not one for the spotlight, wasn't thrilled about even having a wedding. But Sarah had her dreams, and one of them was those 5 outfit changes. It's a once-in-a-lifetime wedding. I won't settle for less. A bride is like the star of her own fairy tale, you know. Tom needs to make all my dreams come true. Faced with this, Tom felt he had no choice. The wedding ended up costing much more than anticipated, draining most of the savings Tom had accumulated since started working. During the 5th outfit change at the reception, a male relative whispered to us, "I've never seen a wedding with so many outfit changes. Tom's pretty much wrapped around her finger, huh? He's in for a tough time." I could only laugh. But his words echoed our own thoughts. People complimented Tom on his beautiful wife, but she also seemed quite proud of her beauty. As parents, we couldn't help but worry about their future together. 2 years post-marriage, they had a baby boy. It had been a difficult birth, but we were thrilled when the baby arrived safely. The day after the birth, we rushed to the hospital. Outside the delivery room, Tom seemed restless and uneasy. "Tom, congratulations! That's wonderful!" "Ah, yeah, thanks." "I can't wait to meet the baby. Mind if I come in?" "Well, about that..." "What's the matter? Something wrong?" "No, it's just... Sarah's really tired right now and doesn't want visitors." "What? So we can't see the baby?" "Oh, no." "Alright then. No choice, I suppose. I'll take some photos and send them to your phone." "What about Sarah's parents?" "They came by earlier." "So they got to meet the baby?" Yeah." "So we're the only ones who can't. Can't you let us have a peek? Just a quick one. It seems like blood relatives and in-laws are treated differently. Sorry, but could you leave for today?" "Fine." Tom looked really uncomfortable. Likely, Sarah had asked him to decline visitors from inside the hospital room. Disappointed, we had no choice but to head home. Our son sent us a photo of the baby. Such a cute sleeping face. Seeing it made both my husband and me even more eager to meet the baby. I'd love to hold my first grandchild in my arms. I timed it around Sarah's and the baby's discharge and called my son to arrange a meeting. But we didn't get a favorable response. Sarah would be taking the baby to her parents' home for a while, so it would be difficult. So we waited for the day Sarah would return to their apartment from her parents' home. The baby was named Lucas. Finally, the time came for Sarah and Lucas to return after receiving postnatal care at her parents'. We got our son to agree, and finally, we were going to meet our grandson. We bought clothes, baby gear, and toys for Lucas. On the day of the visit, we went to our son's apartment. "Hello, may we come in?" Upon entering, we saw Lucas on his baby bed. He was energetically moving his arms and legs. He was a cheerful boy. What a lively boy! He's really cute. Next to the baby bed, Sarah stood with a sullen face. Could I hold him for a bit?" Sarah remained silent. Then Tom spoke. "Mom wants to hold Lucas, is that okay?" My son repeated my request to Sarah. He seemed like he was really treading on eggshells around her. Finally, the silent Sarah spoke. "You two are strangers to me. If you want to hold Lucas, will you pay?" What? We were frozen in disbelief. Strangers? Yes, I married Tom, but you are strangers to me and to Lucas. I don't want him casually held by just anyone. If you insist on holding him, I guess we'll have to set a fee. A fee? But Lucas is our grandchild. Exactly. And Sarah, didn't your parents get to hold Lucas? Of course, they're my parents. In that case, we should also... Look, I'm talking from my own perspective here. I married Tom, not the two of you. You're complete strangers to me. What if you drop Lucas or somehow get him sick? How are you planning to take responsibility? Responsibility, you say? I'm on maternity leave now, but I've been with my company for years, always managing risks. To let a newborn be held by complete strangers who have no intention of taking responsibility is naive, don't you think? Sarah's condescending tone left us, including my husband, dumbfounded. People with your mentality wouldn't last a day at my company. Also, just because Tom and I married doesn't mean we're all suddenly a family. I like to keep boundaries clear. Do you understand? Sarah gesticulated with us as she told us. Sarah animated gestures as if scolding subordinates. She seemed not only good-looking, but also very confident in her long-standing career. She probably talks like this at work too. You could easily guess what the power dynamics between her and Tom, who was 10 years younger, must have been like in their workplace. That hierarchy seemed to have transferred to their marriage. Tom looked surprised at Sarah's words and gave us an apologetic look. But he couldn't muster up any words to counter her. "Let's just go." "All right." And so we left Tom's apartment without even getting to hold Lucas. We had our concerns before, but we never thought it'd come to this. We realized Sarah wants nothing to do with us, and Tom seems completely controlled by her, unable to voice his own opinions. It's harsh to call us strangers, isn't it? Yeah, I never thought we'd hear something like that. Pay money if you want to hold your grandson. But Lucas was so cute. He was. We had this conversation on our way home. Even after we got home, we couldn't stop talking about what had happened. We concluded that there is no other choice but to let go of our hopes. Obviously, in an ideal world, we'd get to hold our grandson and have a good relationship with our son and daughter-in-law. But with everything spelled out like that, we've got to move on. True, at the end of the day, Tom chose to marry Sarah. Yes, what's important is that they're happy. I won't harbor wishes like wanting to hold our grandson or having family dinners anymore. Although I was concerned about whether Tom is really happy in such a situation, I realized it's not our place to question our son's marital choices. If that's how Sarah feels, we have no choice but to adapt. If we forcibly try to do anything, it might make Tom uncomfortable. And so, we lost contact with our son's family. 2 years passed like this. Then one day, we received a call from our son after a long time. "Hello, Mom, it's been a while." "Tom, how have you been?" "Oh yeah, I'm alright. What's going on?" "Well, Sarah and I are thinking about moving out of our apartment and buying a house." "Oh, really?" "Yeah, so I was wondering if you could help us out financially." "What?" I listened as Tom explained the details. After Sarah's maternity leave ended, she returned to work, but she had conflicts with a coworker who had stepped up in her absence. In the end, Sarah quit her job. Now, she's a stay-at-home mom. After that, Sarah seems to have met other moms through her children. Sarah made some mom friends and got inspired by one of who lived in a house, not an apartment. She got excited about moving into a better home. After some house hunting, Sarah fell in love with a newly built home. Tom wasn't exactly thrilled, given their financial situation, but Sarah pushed ahead almost to the point of signing a contract. The down payment was higher than expected, which was a problem. Sarah suggested asking for our help. Sarah says it's a parent's duty to help out when their child is stuck. When we said we wanted to see our grandchild, she told us to pay up. Now she wants our help. Convenient, isn't it? I do feel bad about that. Well, let's put that behind us. As for the money, I have no intention of helping. Oh, alright then. If you can't afford it, live within your means. If you need parental support for something, maybe it's better to skip it. You're right, Mom. You've always been sensible, Tom. I don't know why you even had to ask. I guess so. Sorry for the awkward request. More importantly, are you happy right now? I'm not sure. Tom ended the call. The next day, the doorbell rang. My husband was out and I was home alone. Sarah showed up. Tom was with the kids at a nearby park. I needed to talk to you, my mother-in-law. What is it? Tom said you won't help us financially. That's correct. Don't you think that's harsh? Your own son is asking for help. The house will be under his name. He is the breadwinner. How can you ignore him? Isn't that too cold? I was taken aback for a moment when Sarah barged into my house and started giving me a piece of her mind. Just my luck, my husband isn't home. It's just me. I braced myself, realizing that I had no choice but to stand my ground. Sarah, what gives you the right to walk into this house? Huh? Weren't we total strangers? Sarah froze, locking eyes with me but saying nothing. My son can buy or live wherever he pleases. It's none of my business. He's an adult. If he can't afford it, then he should live within his means. Especially when it comes to you, a complete stranger, telling me to fund his home purchase. I have no such obligation. But your son is actually struggling financially. Are you going to abandon him? Indeed, Tom has left the nest. Sarah was dumbfounded and silent. Moreover, it's not just Tom's house. It's where you will live too, right? Why should we help someone unrelated like you? Shouldn't you be asking your own parents for help? My family can't afford to help right now. Then you should give up on buying a house and stay in your current apartment. At this, her face turned red and she looked furious. Isn't it a parent's role to help out at times like this? Sorry to disappoint. It's different from your ideal, just like you're different from mine. What? Are you saying I'm not your ideal daughter-in-law? How rude! You've been rude too. Remember when you told us to pay up if we wanted to hold our grandchild? How dare you say that to your in-laws? I'm not really matched with my husband, am I? What? I rushed into marriage because I was 36 and desperate. I married Tom because he seemed obedient. To be honest, any groom would have done at that time. So, I think he should be grateful that a high-level woman like me married an average guy like him. Wow, you actually said that out loud. Don't you agree? It's a miracle that a woman like me is married to a man like him. That's why I believe it's natural for me to live in the house of my dreams. So, you wanted to brag about owning a home? So what? Isn't that normal? Yet here we are. Tom can't even make the down payment. I told him to ask his family for help, but everyone's so useless. Just then, Tom walked into the living room. Tom, when did you... Were you listening this whole time? Yes, I was curious about what was going on because I heard loud voices. I've been listening at the front door. So that's why you married me, Sarah. Sarah was visibly startled when Tom burst into the room. Tom's previous look of confusion was gone. His eyes seemed calm, but there was a distinct undertone of anger. Mom, could you play with Lucas in the other room for a bit? Sure. I took Lucas into the adjacent room and closed the door. This was the first time I was directly interacting with Lucas. Voices from the living room started filtering through the door. I reached my breaking point. Breaking point? Do you mean what you said earlier? Who do you think you are? What's with that tone, Tom? You think it's okay to speak to me like that? Enough. What? You should be grateful you even got to marry someone like me, a man who's never even had a girlfriend before. Grateful? Weren't you the one who said you'd marry anyone who came along? You should be the grateful one. I'd never heard Tom raise his voice like this before. Something must have severely damaged his ego, or perhaps he was letting out pent-up frustrations. You kept saying you loved me, chasing me around. At first, I was hesitant, but then thought I could build a family with you. Turns out, you just wanted to use me to say you're married. You never even loved me, bossing me around and even telling my parents they should pay if they want to see their grandson. And now, you want them to help us buy a house. Knowing all this makes everything seem ridiculous. Sarah seemed a bit flustered hearing this. I didn't say that was all true. Lies. I'm done being deceived and used. Our marital power dynamics were skewed from the beginning. I'm not living just to be controlled by you. And I don't want Lucas to grow up seeing such a pathetic mom. It's over. Let's separate. What? No way. I absolutely want to live in that house. I finally found my dream home. I can't give it up. I've always dreamed of inviting friends over for home parties. A loveless marriage in a fancy house just leads to unhappiness. If you want to show off so badly, buy a house yourself. Don't act so high and mighty. Don't command me. That's my line. Such an intense battle unfolded in our living room. I had never seen my son this fired up. Later, it turns out that Sarah had been having several affairs with her former boss. She would sneak out during the day to meet him while leaving Lucas at her parents' home. Learning this, Tom was completely dumbfounded. She was the kind of woman who had a lot of pride, but she was also had a weakness for men who complimented her looks and treated her as if she were special. That was the final straw. Tom and Sarah got officially divorced. Lucas ended up living with Tom. Instead of buying her own house, Sarah found herself being sued for alimony by Tom. She did manage to find a job after some job hunting, but couldn't get along with people, so she quit. Now she seems to be bouncing from job to job. Her looks, once her pride, now seem to have faded away. Since Tom was busy with his work, my husband and I took over caring for Lucas completely. Mom, I'm really sorry for all the trouble I've caused. I should have been more careful in choosing a life partner. That's okay. Everyone makes mistakes, but we all have to cooperate to raise Lucas well. You're right. I'm just glad to see you've become such a responsible adult, Tom. You think you're a much more reliable person now than when you just listened to whatever your wife said. If Lucas grows up seeing a father like that, he's bound to turn out to be a fine adult as well. And so, we live happily as a family of 4, my husband, my son, Lucas, and me. I take great joy in being able to help my son and grandson. Tom is still young, and I secretly hope she meets someone who truly loves and supports him, and, of course, cherishes Lucas too.